In light tight oil, we have the efficiencies have been improving dramatically. That has been driven mainly by efficiencies in the operations. As we evolve with this new, especially in the Permian production, a lot of the companies are looking at artificial lift, especially in the gas side, gas lift side. With that, I'm going to turn it to the panel.
Clearly, what's happening in North America is unconventional development is dominating the scene. You all know that. Private equity, they're unleashing a tremendous amount of capital in the unconventional plays, and to some degree they're dominating the trends. They're a much lower cost operator than the typical independents or larger independents and super majors. They really start with very small management teams and staffs and contractors and really tailor-make their organisation for the play that they're developing. And indeed, they develop sub-plays. They become pure sub-play developers and unlock the potential in that given sub-play. The larger companies have been, let's say, burdened with the culture and the corporate structure of generations of developing companies to do conventional developments all over the world, and if not all over the world, all over North America. These companies are still struggling, and that's why you've seen the analysts give a lot of pushback to their capital programs.
Leading project delivery. This is where digitalization and collaboration is increasingly getting focused. Premium market access, and I'm going to harp on this more in my slide on onshore. What we found, it was the access out of the basin that guided project development.
What we used to happen is a lot of major capital project focus, big infrastructure kind of a project you have heard about, 20, 30, $40 billion projects that you sink money in there and you may get your return 7, 8, 9 years from when you put the money in. Now, overall, the E&P industry is looking to more flexible development programs. You put the money and hopefully in 3 to 4 months you get your first cash out. So I think there is that change that is happening in the industry.
Yeah, that's right. The $21 is the company-wide weighted average, and it's a big part of that is a conventional NCS type. For our onshore US, it was $50.
For the unconventional, you're not seeing break-evens down that low at all, with the costs that we've talked about, generally running $40 to $50 in most plays. The smaller private companies, smaller pure play producers and private equity companies can break even at $35, $30 a barrel. My partners were drilling through the downturn in the Permian in the mid-20s, high 20s, and still continuing their drilling. But offshore conventional is coming back. As you can see, more focus on renewed activity in the Gulf of Mexico, development of fields that were discovered years ago, even the first sanctioning of a recent very large field announced last week in deeper water, and then a lot of private equity coming into the Gulf as well, supporting shallow water developments and redevelopments.
The next step in this journey is Pion. Pion was announced last week. Why is Pion interesting? Pion is the first floating spar which is going to be unmanned. The main goal is 30% capex reduction, 50% opex reduction, and then automated drilling cost. Why is Statoil going in this direction? Number one, we find from our analysis, anywhere between 30 to 80% of the topsides equipment weight is putting people offshore. It's the living quarters, it's the jackets, it's the lifeboats, it's the flare stack, it's the blast wall, it's the potable water generator. If you take all of that out, you've made it cheaper.
Permian is going to be and still going to be the main driver of growth in the next few years for.
The Permian has tremendous potential for future growth, and as I mentioned, some companies decided to become pure players in there for that reason alone. Right now, the basin is just developing on one or two of those target zones. Largely the Wolfcamp A is driving the current frenzy drilling in the Delaware Basin, and likewise the Wolfcamp A and B in the Midland Basin, with secondary developments in the Sprayberry in the Midland and in the Bone Springs 2 sand in the Delaware Basin. There are multiple Bone Springs sands and shales and multiple Wolfcamp zones and shales that have not even been developed economically. These will piggyback off the infrastructure that goes in for the most economic zones, if you will, and with the prices the way they are today, if they stay that way, and the costs of development coming down to a large degree, mainly because of supply chain management and sort of multi-wells on a pad. You know, these other horizons will be developed, and there's hundreds of thousands of undrilled wells out there to be drilled over the next 20 years, and also the technology will develop to increase recovery factors, as we discussed, probably by doubling that. That will create more drilling targets, so a huge amount of drilling to be done in the Permian Basin.
If you build infrastructure, you will increase your netback pricing, and you would get more activities from Permian. Just look at the announcements of some major oil and gas companies who are putting rigs and spend in Permian. So overall, there's a significant potential for Permian to grow.
You know, all these frenzy about $60,000 an acre people getting in, all of these come back as DD&A in your projects, right? So when we looked at that, we couldn't justify getting into Permian at that time.
Yeah, the cost of the completions has gone up, not going down. Just because of the constraint on the market, the higher demand, more wells being drilled per rig, and supply chain constraints, as we've seen earlier. So you see this talk about costs going down, but they're going up. Especially 5 or 6 years ago, these plays were getting 500 pounds per foot of proppant. Now they're getting 2,500 pounds per foot and even higher. So increased sand and constraint on equipment and more wells, the costs are going up, no doubt. The service companies had a very difficult time during the downturn, and they're just now struggling to get back into the black.
We used to have a lot of assurance and functional excellence kind of a mindset. We are moving into innovation and how we can learn by doing, and how we can really accelerate those kind of adoption quickly in our place. We used to think a lot of physics-based modeling. Now, as Colin mentioned, there's a lot of data analytics going on right now.
One of my previous bosses, this was also in Halliburton, he explained this to me. In the 1920s in Oklahoma, if you pumped in water into your oil field, oil wells, you would be taken away in handcuffs. Right? That was the understanding of the traditional oil field, of a traditional field in the 1920s. That's still what it is today for the shales. Only 30% recovered with all this science and technology that's being put in.
I call that, like, how do we reduce unnecessary complexity that used to happen in 10 to 14 kind of a time period. And it's not just that operators will be able to figure it out by itself. You need to have long-term collaborative relationships with your supplier to figure these things out. That's how you will sustain low cost of supply. Otherwise, it just won't happen. We'll again go back to the same old situation.
Yes, it's hurting. It doesn't necessarily have to be taking away the bread from the Halliburtons and Schlumbergers and the Bakers of the world. All we feel is some of the froth that was developed in the frenzy from 2010 to 2014. I think some of that froth has to come down. Now, when you're increasing the lateral, we pretty much know that the first 1 or 2 toe fracs, their efficiencies are very poor. Right? And if the service companies can come out by reducing the friction, by making sure the sand is put at 100% at this first 1 or 2 toe fracs, we'd be happy to pay the extra cost. So that's where I think that the technology plays in to make sure everybody wins in this scenario. In the southern Marcellus, we had Uday showed a graph saying the spot prices went down to $2.50. I was facing 50 cents. Right? It took me about $1 to get the gas out. It took me about 50 cents for the infield gathering, and then any pipeline access to the markets, whether it's New York or Atlanta or Florida, was about 95 cents. And there goes my margin. I can't develop my field anymore, right? So for our northern Marcellus asset, you heard about Chesapeake. We are 30% non-op operator partners with Chesapeake. We have premium access to Manhattan and Toronto, and that's the one that pretty much drove our profitability.